Does this work? Yeah. Right, so this is Wendy. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay, I've got short legs.
Oh. Huh? Okay, everyone can hear me? Oh, there we go. Right, so I think in the Bible we see Jesus, and we see that he cares about justice, and he cares for the orphans and the oppressed and the widows. So this is why Wendy's story right now is so exciting, because it's like a modern day version of, not that she's Jesus, but how justice happens and with her faith. So yeah. So Wendy, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Well, I've lived in England 30 years, but can anyone guess where I'm from? I get really excited when people hear a little bit of an accent, but there's not much left anymore. Oh, close. I'm Australian. I am Australian. When my girls were little, they used to say, "Speak Australian," and I have to go, "Yeah, g'day." But it's quite gone now. So yeah, I've been here for 30 years. My husband's from Brighton, and yep.
Cool. So word on the street is that you have an interesting romantic story about how you met him. May we hear it?
Yep. Yes, so as I said, I'm from Australia, and our girls will say they met on a ship in Africa, which sounds very romantic, but he worked in the engine room at the time and was covered in grease. But it was a ship that, it was called a missionary ship. It was a part of an organisation, and it went around the world. It had like a book exhibition, and it did educational programs around the world, and also like aid and support, sort of local work that was going on in different ports. So I was on the ship for a year. I lived in Egypt previous to that, and then I was on the ship for a year. And my husband, as I said, worked in the engine room for 3 years. And so we met off the coast of West Africa.
Very exciting, very exotic. So you're part of Off the Fence. Can you tell us a little bit about Off the Fence and maybe how it started?
Yeah. So as I said, we met in 1986. We left the ship and Paul came back to Brighton. I went to Australia. We were married and lived in Australia for a year. And we always thought that we were going to go back to Africa to do sort of development, missionary kind of work. That was kind of in our heads. But we came back to England and we went to theological college for 3 years. And thinking, as I said, we were preparing to go abroad. But during that time, my father-in-law had cancer, and I was pregnant with our first child, and it was quite a difficult pregnancy. And so there was a lot going on, and Paul got quite sick with stress, and the doctors just said, look, you can't go abroad just yet. You need a year or two of just normal kind of living. And so he started working for a local church, but he knew that he didn't want to be in a church. That kind of was not our plan. And so he said, okay, I can work with the church and the young people and do different things, but I want at least one day a week where I'm going to go out in the community. And it was early 1990s, and there was a lot of homelessness, and travellers was kind of new, and it was a growing problem, but there wasn't a lot of agencies at the time. And so basically he just started going out on the streets to talk to young people, but was meeting more and more homeless people, travellers. And one day he met a young girl, and she had no shoes and no coat, and she was freezing. It was November, getting really cold. And he was going out with a friend at the time, and they said, look, let's go into a charity shop, and they bought her a jacket and some shoes and a second-hand sleeping bag. They didn't see her, they didn't think much more of it. About 3 or 4 months later, they met her again, and they said, oh, we haven't seen you for a while. And she said, I've just come out of hospital. And the doctor said, what you bought for me probably saved my life. And so then they started thinking, okay, this is a real thing, you know. And so the next winter, he went out again with 2 or 3 friends. We put an appeal in local churches and saying, you know, can we have some second-hand sleeping bags? I think the first year we gave out about 40, and went out with flasks of tea and coffee and soup, and went out and started talking to homeless people. And that was really the beginning. We didn't know what it was the beginning of. We thought it was waiting for us to go to Africa. But after 2 or 3 years, we thought, okay, this is becoming something now. And there was a meeting, and we asked for a few volunteers to come and help us, and 40 people came to the meeting. And so that was, if you like, the birth of Project Anti-Freeze.
Cool. So why did it start? Like, what was your ethos? Because I know that you and your husband went to theology college, and he found that quite impactful.
Yes, well, as I said, I think for us, it was always about sharing God's love with people, but it was not about getting people to come into a church. It was about going out and just caring for people where they're at. whatever state they're in, and particularly those on the margins of society. When we're at theology college, a lot of people were kind of preparing to go, and people wanted to work with a particular kind of people or go to China or Africa. And we never really had that, even though that was kind of our plan. But the only thing we knew was to work with people on the edges of society in some way, not a particular people group or area of the world, but it was just those that didn't quite fit for different reasons. Paul's background was quite different to mine, and he's quite open about his story, but his father was an alcoholic, and he got into a lot of trouble as a young teenager in Brighton, and he when he did become a Christian and found, a God that loved him and a father who loved him, which he never had, he felt that he wanted to share that with young people and so that was, as I said, why he started going out on the streets on Fridays to meet young people, because he thought, there is hope for people and for young people that are getting into trouble, and that was really his heart. And one of the things when we were at college, he did a project, and it was on the founder of Salvation Army, a man called William Booth. And William Booth said, you can't go out with like a gospel or, a piece of the Bible to a starving man unless it's sandwiched between two pieces of bread. And so that was something that was really in us. Yes, we wanted to share God's love with people and talk to them about a God that loved them, but you can't do that if someone is in immediate need and crisis. And so we really, right from the beginning, it was about caring for people, if you like, going into their front room, sitting with them, having a chat, how are you doing today? And then as we got to know them and as that grew, we thought it wasn't just about a crisis when they're on the streets. We wanted to work with them in a longer term basis. And so quite early on, we had a small little office where they could come and get support. And then that has grown into a day centre, which is in Hove and Portland Road. And we get anything between 40 and 60 people a day, sometimes more, coming in, getting immediate needs, getting food, but also getting help and support. They can get lots of practical things. We have Red Cross coming in, a lot of other agencies use our centre as well. And so that has grown over the years. But alongside that, there was also a lot of vulnerable women. There's not as many homeless women. About 90% of rough sleepers are male, but for different reasons, if a marriage or relationship breaks up, it's often the man that has to leave. But a lot of women are really struggling and maybe recovering from domestic violence or struggling as a single mom. There's also a lot of mental health issues. And so we realised that there was a lot of vulnerable women who perhaps weren't street homeless, but who really were struggling. And that was my heart. When I was 18, I had a spare room in my flat in Australia. And a friend of mine just said, look, there's a young woman who is about your age, but she's just had a child taken into care, and she's really struggling, and she needs somewhere to stay for 4 weeks. Can she stay in your spare room? And so I said, yes, that's fine. And so when I went to the hostel to meet her, I will never forget walking into the small lounge room with about 10 girls all sitting there watching television. And when I walked in and I said hello, they all looked up and went, oh, hi. But there was just such sadness. I could see there was such pain. There was young women, young girls my age, 18, 19, but you could just see that they'd been through so much in their very young lives already. And I walked out of that place in tears. And I do remember just praying. I said, God, I want my life to count. I want to do something for young girls like that. And in a way that has driven me right the way through. So even though I had a young family and Paul was working with homeless, that kind of didn't quite leave me, and I trained as a counsellor. And then in the early 2000s, we began a support service for women. And that has grown into now a second day centre called Gateway Women's Centre, which is in Port Slade. And that just works. My thing as well wasn't, part of our ethos is to treat everyone as an individual, not because you have this problem or that problem. And often that's how they're seen from society. Which label are we going to try and fix? And they go from expert to expert to address that label. And I just wanted a place where women could come just to be a woman, and they didn't have to even tell us what their label was. Often we do find out, and often it's a lifetime of post-traumatic stress, of different things, abuse and struggles, but it's just about caring for them where they're at. And so we do lots of different things in Gateway. Practical support, we have a small food bank, mainly just for our clients, although the job centre down the road also send people for that. We have clothing, they can come and do craft, and we have workshops and art workshops and sewing workshops where they can do skills and life skills and just do things that get them out of the house and doing something else. Because often I realised at the beginning of that project I was meeting people one-to-one and we were just offering a befriending service. And sometimes it's not always, they don't want to sit and talk about their problem for an hour and then next week we talk about their problem. Sometimes it's about coming and having someone saying, how are you doing? And just not talking about the problem and just treating them as a woman. And so that's what Gateway has become. And we do a lot of work, benefits and forms and a lot of practical stuff as well. Next week I'm at court with someone. So lots of different things that we do with women. And then alongside all of that, as I said, part of Paul's story was that he was a young kid in a lot of trouble. And he still had a heart for that. And so we have had a schools and youth team going alongside that right from the beginning, supporting young people, doing things in schools right across the city. We do lunchtime clubs where people can come and a safe space for them at lunchtimes, after school clubs. We do one-to-one mentoring, lessons for kids that are perhaps again on the edges, at risk of being excluded or being bullied, or the person that is the bully, and we do small groups to just do personal development classes for 10 weeks. They can get nominated from their teachers to come and do these. So that is going alongside. So we have three main projects: Antifreeze, Gateway, and Schools and Youth.
Have you found that in you caring for them, there's a sense of empowerment, that you're giving them that power to change their lives?
Yeah, our ethos or our strapline of Off the Fence, and I always forget it, is resisting poverty, empowering people, restoring hope. And that thread runs through everything that we do. It's about giving people opportunity. It's about giving people a chance to change, to perhaps make healthier choices, but also just to care for them even if they don't. A lot of services, and perhaps they have to, but statutory services and the government, it's about having a safe society, and sometimes that's not always caring for the individual. Recently, there's been a big thing, you may have heard, the government and Brighton Council have set targets to eradicate homelessness by the year 2021. And when this came out in the free newspaper that some of the homeless guys were reading in the centre, they started talking about it and how they were going to do it. And one guy just looked at me and said, "You eradicate disease, you eradicate pests and rats. I feel like we're just a nuisance that the government want to eradicate and get off the streets, but not really help us." And then he said, "That's why we love Antifreeze, because you treat us as an individual, and you're not just here to fix our problem or to get us off the streets, but you're here to care for us." And that's what we do. That's our ethos, caring for people, yes, giving them opportunity to change, but caring for them even if they're not ready for that. And one story, I was talking to a guy last year, and he said, 3 of my friends have died in the last year. He said, "I'm 51, he looked about 71, and he said, "I'm 51, I know it's my time. If I don't get off the streets, I probably won't be here in another year." And we're able to help him find housing and support him into moving into a supported housing unit. So it's about giving people opportunity, so when they are ready to change, we can help them with that.
Well, I find it so powerful just listening to what you do. I remember when I was talking to you on the phone about your story, you were saying that although you're expanding, the problem is getting worse.
Yeah.
So just wondering, where do you see the future of your project, and how are you, what are the challenges in terms of tackling the growing need?
Unfortunately, we're living in an age, as we all know, of austerity, but that is creating a lot more problem in every area where there is poverty. It's going to grow. The government-owned figures say that within the next decade, homelessness will increase by about a third. That could be quite a conservative figure, but that's their own figures are predicting that, regardless of them trying to eradicate it. So for lots of different reasons, we know all the benefit system is being cut, and so that's putting a real squeeze on families. So a lot of the women that we're dealing with have got debt, have gone, you see all these payday loans and stuff like that. They've resorted to them to try and buy things or pay for things. So we're helping them rearrange loans and things like that. And just general cuts across every services. So mental health services are being cut. In schools counselling in Brighton, they've just cut the budget again, which means our one-to-one mentoring, we've got waiting lists, we can only provide a certain amount of that, but again, the need and demand of that has increased. So a lot of it is, as government cuts continue, our work, the potential for our work is growing, sadly, because these problems are increasing. And so some of the plans that we have in place is our newest project, which just launched in November, again because of cuts to different services. We have launched 2 vans that go out now across the city. One is a mobile laundry, and Electrolux, we worked with them, and they donated 2 large industrial washing machines, and they had to adapt them so that we had 20-minute cycles. And then we have 2 dryers in the back and a generator. And so that was all sort of funded and going out across the city to different services and outside our day centre as well. Because obviously just personal hygiene is a huge issue for homeless. And so we have also a smaller hygiene van, which has got supplies, and that can go out with the night teams. We still have teams going out 2 nights a week, working with the homeless, perhaps entrenched homeless, maybe who don't come to our centres, just keeping an eye on them, giving them supplies, making sure they're okay. And so we have the 2 vans going out regularly across the city. And this year, the new project is a shower unit, again, to go across with the vans across the city so that homeless have somewhere to wash and keep themselves clean. So that's new projects for antifreeze. And I think with the other projects, it's just continuing doing what we're doing with Gateway, Women's Centre. We're in Portslade, which is sort of the other side of Brighton, on the way out of Brighton. And we were offered this building, so we had it, but we felt that was really strategic as well, because a lot of services are in Brighton, and so it was offering something in a different area. But as the demand increases, as other services are cut, we'd like to work in different areas of Brighton as well. So we're looking to do what we're calling pop-up gateways or satellites, so perhaps working with schools and food banks and other organisations across the city to perhaps go in once a week and do a session, and then we get to know women and those that need further support. We can offer one-to-one support, or they may want to come to other services at Gateway. And so there are a couple of the things that we've got developing this in the next year or 2.
You're phenomenal in what you're doing. I guess there may be some people sitting here today who see that like there's other things going on, there's other people or organisations doing things for the homeless and vulnerable. So just want to ask, what difference does having Jesus in your life make to what you're doing?
I think for us, it's the reason why we do it. As I said, for us, our whole ethos, and we're perhaps coming from it from a different angle. As I said, the government social services, social action is often about changing environments or circumstances and hoping then that that will change people. And I guess we come from a different angle. We're saying that if you know that you're loved and if you're cared for as you are, that's going to change you or inspire you to change. And then that will, in effect, change society. So it's working from a different angle, really. And it can be slower. We're not there just to fix people, as I said. We're not there just to rip off a label and go, tick, we've done that one, we've solved that issue. But we're there to care for people and to show them that they're loved. We have a lady who comes to Gateway, and she comes once a week to what she calls her craft club. And she says, this is my happy place. This is where I come to fill up with happiness. She said, often, week to week, she wouldn't see she said, I wouldn't have another meaningful conversation with anybody. But she said, I come and this is enough to get me through until I can come next week. That's what we try and do. We try and just value people. And for me, that's because God loves everyone as an individual. He doesn't look at their issue or their mistakes or whatever it is that we often look at as human beings. And so that's what we try and do with everyone who comes to any of our services. We just want to say, look, there's hope, there's a second chance, there's a third chance, there's a 10th chance, a 100th chance, whatever it is, and we want to give people hope and whether that's they're stuck in addictions or mental health issues or whatever it is, feeling isolated, we can come alongside and journey with them.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'm sure will you be around at the end? So if anyone wants to chat to her, you can, because she'll be here. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.